This is without question one of the biggest days of my entire life. The first test drive of the Ferrari on track was a huge success. I am beyond stoked with how this car drives. It is everything that I hoped that it would be. Whether you're here just to see it rip or if you want all the details of what it took to get comfortable behind the wheel and to turn those laps, I've got it all for you in this episode. This is going to be a good one, so buckle in. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you should consider doing so. It helps support the channel. And we're going to do one more test session in this car before we put it in a container and ship it across the world to Australia for the World Time Attack Challenge later this year. Enjoy the episode. This has been a long time coming. 2.5 years ago, almost to the day, I bought a 1981 308 GTBI. It is without question one of the nicest cars I have owned even to this day, but that did not stop us from doing what some might consider to be unthinkable. In the name of building a time attack car, we ripped out the Italian V8. We cut off all 4 arches to install wider fenders, and with that came wider wheels and tires. Most important, though, was the drastic change in power plant. We bought a 4-piston racing, 1,000 horsepower capable Honda K24 to drop weight, add power, and increase reliability. We paired the engine with a Quaife sequential transmission and a massive Garrett turbo, only to have the snowball effect take hold, where we slowly but surely replaced every single part on this car, and almost all of it has been custom. We've designed our own control arms and uprights and suspension geometry as a whole, to all of the systems within the car down to the wiring that makes it work. The resulting car represents nearly every dollar I've had to my name since the project began, and it represents nearly 5,000 hours of labor. After a number of dyno sessions to work out the drivability kinks, we took this thing around the block for the very first time last week. It's a project we've chronicled through 128 episodes so far, and to be totally transparent, there were certainly times it felt like this project may never actually get finished. But today, that changes. 2.5 years of hard work comes together for this moment right here, backing the car out of the trailer at Buttonwillow Raceway Park, where we'll be driving this car the way it was meant to be driven for the first time ever. I would be lying if I didn't admit that this felt like one of the biggest days of my entire life so far. So much has gone into this car to get to this point, and for those of you that have watched every episode, you know what's gone into this project and what it took to get here. And so begins the final checklist. But this time, it's not one that takes us to a car show or fairground. Instead, it's one with real consequences. It's a checklist that ensures all of the time, money, and effort that has gone into this car keeps it in one piece while I strap myself inside to find out what I've truly built. But before we actually drive the car, let's clear one thing up. I want to be clear in saying this is a test session. A shakedown, a run where we find out what the car needs most and what will break first. As many of you know, I'm no professional, I'm just a guy chasing a dream, and given that there's nothing on this car I haven't had my hands on, literally anything could fail. But I gave this project my all and built the best car that I could, so it's time to find out what it's actually made of. However, I won't be undergoing this process alone, because with me is Will Drees. For those of you that don't know, Will is a class record holder here at Buttonwillow, but more importantly, Will lives for the science of the setup. Like me, Will knows how to build a car, but unlike me, Will knows how to make that car go fast, and I don't mean in the sense of just pushing down the loud pedal. Instead, Will knows how to take the sum of a car's parts and make them work together in total unison to turn faster and faster laps. He also knows how to transition from a project that exists in the garage to one that is a functional race car. To put it in its simplest terms, Will is fluent in the language that race cars speak when they ask to go faster, and luckily for me, he's willing to share his experience and listen to what my car has to say. So let's start the conversation. Before heading out onto the actual racing surface, Will deemed that it was critical we take a few slow laps around the paddock, not only to bring the car up to temperature, but to do our best to shake anything loose before it matters most. The first goal was to bring all of our fluids up to operating temp, but more important than that was to yank the wheel back and forth and to disrupt the car in an effort to shake anything loose that could come loose before we get out on the racing surface. Thankfully, the process of nut and bolt checking the car before heading to the track paid off, and it feels solid enough to take that first lap. However, unlike the track cars I've had prior to this one, the Ferrari requires real safety gear. Not only is it fully caged and hard to get in and out of, it only weighs 2,600 pounds wet with me in it. On low boost, it has 640 horsepower at the rear wheels, and the fuel cell sits immediately behind me. This is both a fast and potentially dangerous car, so we're going to take this seriously. Once I was in the car, strapped in and fully geared up, Will made sure I was comfortable and confident, and then we fired up the beast once more for the moment I had been waiting for. Will's assignment was for me to drive the car for 2 laps and bring the car back to the paddock. To be clear, these were 2 very slow, relatively boring laps. It wasn't about speed or traction, it was just about making sure I was comfortable in the car. As a reminder, I've only driven this car up to about 20 miles an hour around the shop. This was the car's first chance to start stretching its legs and my first opportunity to see what that feels like. There is an immense amount of stress that comes with driving a completely untested, hand-built car for the first time, so I really wanted to ease into this process and not push it. Rest assured, though, we're going to get there later in the episode. Those first 2 test laps, though, were a success. The car felt good, it felt connected, it felt compliant, it felt confident. They might be slow laps around Buttonwillow, but they're slow laps around Buttonwillow in a car I built from the ground up, and that felt amazing.
I'm so stoked right now.
2.5 years in the making, and the car works. In my excitement, Will swooped in to celebrate, but then reminded me to focus on both the positives and the negatives of what I had just experienced. He was curious to know if I was comfortable in the car and how it felt behind the wheel going around the track. I'm happy to report back that the seating position feels fantastic. The pedals feel correct, and the steering wheel is pretty close, although the steering ratio could use a little bit of improvement. The car itself seemed happy. There were no surprises, it felt solid, there were no shakes or shimmies. It gave me the confidence to go back out on track for another couple of laps and start leaning on it a little bit harder. One of the most promising signs, though, was how the car was handling the heat. I was worried that we'd get out to the track and fight our cooling system endlessly. It's been through numerous revisions, and it's only had dyno time under its belt, so it was my assumption that the cooling system would plague the day. But the CSF radiator did the trick, and our coolant temps during the first session never crested 70 degrees Celsius or 160 Fahrenheit. That was confidence-inspiring, to say the least. On the list of stuff that needed small tweaks and fixes, first was our brake lights, which we needed to change to pressure activation for the safety of those around us. We gave the car a thorough once-over for any potential leaks or drips, and thankfully all we found was residual fluid from our time on the dyno. Last but not least, we needed to change one of the O-rings within the HD clamps on our charge piping. I had made a note that I had snagged this O-ring during installation previously and that it should be replaced to prevent any potential boost leaks, but of course I forgot to do that before heading to the track, so it was a paddock fix. Thankfully, I brought spares with me, and Will was able to tackle this in just a few minutes. But given that this is the first outing of a fully hand-built car, we decided to pull some stuff apart and give the suspension components a once-over to make sure that all of the bolts were still tight, ball joints were still in check, and everything was ready to be leaned on, even if only a little bit harder. Feeling good about how everything looked, we put the car back together one more time, and made sure to torque our lug nuts to 110 foot-pounds because in Will's experience, titanium nuts on steel studs can and will loosen up under track usage. I put the gear on again, got behind the wheel, and took the car out for another 2 laps. This time around, I gave the car full throttle on the straights, and to say it's fast is an understatement. This thing has some serious boogie to it. I was also feeling a little bit more comfortable in the turns, enough to start experiencing some lateral G-forces, and to feel what the mechanical grip of the car is actually like, although to be clear, I got nowhere close to the actual grip limit. After my second pair of laps, I came back to the paddock for one more once-over before hitting the track again for a third session. This time, the goal was to do 5 consecutive laps and really start putting heat into the tires. I was feeling more comfortable in the car, and it was time to start trusting it to do what it was built to do. However, it was Will's suggestion that I trust my nose to identify if there was any impending problems. It was more likely that I'd smell something going wrong before I'd hear it or see it. And it turns out that was good advice, because I came in after smelling something getting hot, only to find that my foolish self forgot to remove the plastic plug from the fill port on the top of the transmission and replace it with a steel one. Fortunately, this is a very minor issue. We're only talking about a few ounces of total fluid loss, although it did happen to spray up and land directly on the header. But no harm, no foul. Thankfully, I had this on my checklist to do, and thus I brought the new plug with me to the track, so it was just a matter of installing it and cleaning up the mess that we made. While we were at it, Will added black duct tape to the tops of the aluminum closeout panels I put on the dashboard because the sun reflecting off of them made it impossible to see out of the windscreen now that the sun was high in the sky. Finally, we installed the engine cover, feeling somewhat confident we wouldn't need to remove it in a hurry, and then put together a game plan for the next session. This time, we wanted to record pressures and temperatures of our new Falken RT660s so that we could begin to dial in the alignment and extract the most traction possible out of these incredible tires. Because the fill plug cut things short, the goal this time around again was to do 5 flying laps and to put as much heat as possible into the tires as we could. At this point in the day, we had 6 to 8 laps under our belt, which is admittedly not many, but I was growing in confidence in all of the systems of the car, especially the brakes. So I was heel-toe shifting into the braking zones and braking later and later as each successive lap went by. I was also growing in confidence that the suspension wouldn't come apart as I rode higher up onto the curbs and pushed it harder through each turn. According to the coolant temp, the oil pressure, and the air-fuel ratio, the engine was happy, so I was leaning on it harder and longer through each straight, building more and more speed, overall accumulating into faster and faster laps as the day went on. Even still, I know I'm braking very early. The braking system requires the most confidence of all. Blowing the braking zone means going off track, and given that we're not even 10 laps into a test session, I'm still building my confidence to rely on them at the last second. Each consecutive lap, though, was getting several seconds faster. What started at 3-minute laps at the beginning of the day by putting around in borderline slow motion was knocking on the door of a 2-minute lap and a personal best only a dozen laps in. And I'd say that was only at about half pace. I was hardly asking much of the car. I was still largely just finding the edge of my comfort zone. It was about 3 laps into this session, and on my 12th lap overall, that I was really starting to get temperature into the tires and feel a sense of confidence in the seat of the car. I was starting to pass others and catch the pace that I had accomplished in my E30 M3 about a year ago. However, it was on this lap, my fastest one, that disaster struck. Listen closely. I was holding some great pace on this lap. It was going to be by far the fastest yet, and I think that if I had continued, it would have been no problem to set a new personal best and cross into the 159 or 158 territory before the end of the day. However, something about the car was unhappy. I was at the end of this lap, and so I pulled into the hot pit and still let Will take tire temperatures and pressures because it's useful data to understand what might need changing with respect to suspension and alignment. But once I was back in the paddock, we pulled the engine cover off and took a look around, trying to understand what could have gone wrong before we realized one of our HD clamps took a hike. Now these things have a burst pressure of over 800 psi, so we didn't blow it off, so chances are the pin wasn't fully engaged. But because I didn't have a spare with us, it meant we couldn't put the car back on the track. We couldn't build any boost or manifold pressure. As you might guess, this was a huge bummer because I was finally starting to build some pace. I was feeling confident in the car and going faster and faster with each successive lap. But given that we couldn't drive the car anymore, we took the opportunity to analyze everything that we had accomplished so far and began putting together a list of everything we needed to change, fix, or modify. Will looked at the data from the AIM Solo and says, it's clear there's a ton of room for improvement, but more importantly, this car has the potential to be crazy fast. I'm leaving an immense amount of time on the table in both the braking zones and in lateral Gs through the turns. So while it might be optimistic for my personal skill level, I'm setting a goal of breaking into the 40s here at Buttonwillow someday in the future. But that does mean we have a lot of development ahead of us. I guess that just means we're going to have to come back many, many times in the future. Despite the fact that this day was cut short, it was the most exhilarating part of the build so far. And to put it simply, this is the beginning of a brand new chapter. While the heavy lifting may be done as far as fabrication, there's still a lot to do to extract everything we can out of this car, and I've got a lot of learning to do as a driver to make this thing as fast as we possibly can. So it's time to head home, make some changes, make some fixes, and work on getting ourselves back to the track as soon as possible so that this build can continue to the next step. All right, so it's the next day. Obviously, we're back at the shop, and I'm gonna ramble on for a minute here, but it's 2.5 years in the making, so you gotta listen to it or skip. I don't care, whatever. Yesterday was one of the single best days of my entire life. 2.5 years of just so much work, so much money, so much effort, all into this car, all came into how yesterday was gonna go, and I couldn't have asked it to go any better. I'm not upset whatsoever about losing our clamp and having the day cut shorter than anticipated. It was still picture perfect. The car feels so good. I am so excited. Every bit of this feels so worth it. I'm so eager to get back out on track again. I'm gonna try to go out again next week before the car has to leave for Australia. Honestly, I don't even wanna let the car go to Australia at this point. I want to drive this thing, but I can't miss this opportunity. We've been pushing for it. We're gonna let it go, and it'll come back. So, with all that said, I'm sure some of you guys are wondering how the car feels. You wanna hear my thoughts on it. So, let's talk about it. There's definitely room for improvement. Lots needs adjusting, lots needs working on, so on and so forth. There's a ton of development that will happen here. This is just the first step. And I also didn't really get a chance to start pushing the car hard. Unfortunately, the lap that I lost my clamp on was probably gonna be my fastest one so far, and we were just getting faster and faster with each session of the day. I feel really comfortable in the car. Everything about it feels really good so far. The amount of traction is insane. I can't believe it doesn't wheel spin at all. I can't believe that it has the amount of traction it does in the turns. I've never driven anything like this. It's so far beyond my own comfort level and experience level with how fast it can take turns and just hold it to the pavement. It's ridiculous. The seating position inside feels so good. I was comfortable. I was able to heel toe. I wasn't hitting my elbows on the seat. The steering wheel position felt really good. Just everything about it was right where I wanted it. It felt proper. It all came together. I'm thrilled. Driving wise, I don't even know where to begin. It feels great. And again, I know there's so much more work that's gonna have to go into this thing before it's, truly a fast car, but I think I said many times over early in the build that I worried I'd get all the way done with this project and that it just wouldn't feel good. The car would just kind of suck. Like, yeah, it looks really neat and it's a cool car, but it's not a good car. And I can tell it can be a great car. I'm so thrilled with how it came out. This is the best. This is so sick. I don't even know where to go from here. I could probably ramble for hours, but I'm also speechless. Yesterday was incredible. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I want to give a special thanks again to Will for making yesterday as smooth as it was. I wouldn't have been able to do it without him. It would have been a disaster by comparison. His experience, his knowledge, and his help made yesterday what it was. So thank you again, Will, for everything. You are an asset. I am so fortunate to have made yesterday even happen. So thank you. And then some of you guys probably noticed that I wasn't filming yesterday. I brought out Anthony Pham. He reached out on Instagram and asked if I was looking for any help filming. He came out. He did a beautiful job, as you guys can see. I'm super appreciative for his help. Hopefully we'll have him on more stuff in the future. And with that said, I'm gonna get to fixing. I wanna get back out next week. Thanks for the support. I'll catch you guys soon.